Good afternoon, councillors, staff, members of the public. Welcome along to this meeting, which I declare open. Under announcements, 2 weeks ago, councillors Cook, Steck and myself attended the Bunbury RSL sub-branch annual dinner, and they presented a certificate of appreciation to the city for our support to the sub-branch, and it's there on display. I also incurred a cost of $11 to purchase tea bags during the last period, councillors. Apologies tonight is Councillor Warnock and Councillor Steele. We'll deal with a request for leave of absence towards the end of the agenda, Councillor Steck. Declaration of interest, we have those declarations there, and I also add my own. It's an impartiality interest with respect to item 10.4.4. As I'm an honorary member of the South Bunbury Rotary Club, and I was a member of the Rotary Club 17 years ago with one of the applicants. Any further declarations of interest? Confirmation 7.11, so I'm prepared to move. We confirm the minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Cook, Councillor Hayward, all in favour? It's carried unanimously, thank you. Do we have any petitions tonight? We have a request for deputations, councillors. Mr. Ross Underwood from Planning Solutions requests approval to speak to item 10.4.3. Those who approve, please indicate. That's approved. Mrs. Rhonda Bridgham requests approval to speak to item 10.4.4. Those who approve, please indicate. That's approved. Mr. Stephen Scott Higgins requests approval to speak to item 10.4.4. Those who approve, please indicate. That's approved. And Mr. Gary Fitzgerald from TCON also wishes to speak to item 10.4.4. Those who approve, please indicate. That's approved. So we'll get to those items shortly. 8.41. Some are prepared to move. We thank the report provided by Councillor Cook be received. So I'm prepared to move that. Councillor Smith, second up. Councillor McCleary, all in favour. That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Cook. Appreciate that. Councillors, dealing with tonight's agenda, coming out for consideration at this stage are items 10.4.3, 10.4.4, and of course we have a confidential item. So that leaves two. Does anybody wish to raise either of those? If that is the case, can I have someone move we adopt those, please? Councillor Cook, Councillor Hayward, all in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Steck. Mr. Underwood, welcome along.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you're ready.
Yeah, you know the drill, Ross. 5 minutes.
My apologies.
You're out the door.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I don't intend to say too much tonight. Of course, we're looking at a proposed local centre at the Homemaker Centre in Bunbury. There is, of course, a comprehensive report which has been attached to the agenda that goes through it in detail, and that report's about a year in the making. Perhaps three key messages which I think council should consider. Firstly, the Homemaker Centre has a workforce that's about a quarter the size of the workforce of the CBDs. We're dealing with a substantial workforce which is located at the Homemaker Centre, and this local centre will provide convenience for those. Secondly, the particular area along Albert Road and Herbert Road is an area which isn't currently serviced within a walkable catchment of an activity centre. This proposed centre fills that gap and provides for services for those particular residents in that area. And thirdly, we have done a lot of work to firm up the economic side of things. There's been a report prepared which shows that there will not be an impact on the viability of other activity centres in Bunbury. So with that being said, I look forward to the deliberation tonight. This proposal before you is to provide for consent to send it to the WAPC for advertising, and that will of course start the roll. I expect there'll be further discussions ongoing through the advertising process that we would be pleased to be involved in. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm prepared to move the executive recommendation. Councillor Hayward.
Happy to
Is there a
move.
seconder? Councillor Cook. Councillor Hayward, you wish to speak?
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors, we've had a brief on this already. I guess the point, from our point of view, is that this is not approving anything other than starting a process to give the public the opportunity to have their feedback about it. It's an interesting spot potentially to have a local centre, and again we've had a look at some of those plans in the area and how it links into the existing residential space in East Bunbury there, and also how it potentially reacts with other local centres. There is an opportunity for an IGA or something to be placed in there, and I think that really it is quite an exciting project, and I think that it is worthy of our support. Each of these things, when they come online, if eventually that was to happen, create employment and opportunities for young people to be involved, and I think that it is an opportunity to retrofit a commercial space and do something different with it, and I think on that basis it deserves our support to take it out to the public and see what the public's view is about this proposal. So I'd urge councillors to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Speaker against this? I'll put it all in favour. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor McCleary. Mrs. Bridgham. Welcome to you. There is a 5-minute period and there's a clock in front of me to guide you.
Oh.
Well, away you go. Thank you.
It just is very big print, that's all. Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to speak. We were sort of cut off last time, so we just wanted to have a minute. When we set out to build our new home, our two criteria were to come back into Bunbury to live, where we were closer to friends and closer to properties that we manage, and to have a great view. We found the block, we engaged the designer and builder, and things went pear-shaped from there. We have been through hell on this build, which has taken its toll on both of our health, mental and physical. Now, we only found out about this requirement in February. And apparently it came to light when Mr Scott Higgins made a complaint and the building department acted on the complaint. It wasn't mentioned by our designer because he knew that it conformed to the R code. Our builder should have mentioned it, the small notation on the plan he received back from the council, but he didn't. So you can see this came as a complete shock to us, and the whole process has been deeply upsetting. And you can forgive us that the first thing we didn't think of was to rush up and discuss it with our neighbours. Mr Scott Higgins made the comment that we had a clear view into his daughter's bedroom, and that comment is clearly untrue and misleading when we're offended by this cynical and erroneous inference and can quite categorically say that we'd have to be contortionists to do so, as Gary's photos will show actually. We can see the front of his house from ours, yes, but so can just about everyone else in town. We believe that Mr Scott Higgins was able to put the worst possible slant on the privacy issue. And quite honestly, I had so little interest in the front garden and house that until I went up there Tuesday, I wouldn't have been able to tell you how many windows they had in the front of their house. All of our grandchildren have been to visit us during the past school holidays, and that will continue when we move into our new home. Our backyard is our only private space. We have 3 other properties that overlook our backyard, and there is no building R4 code requirement for privacy or screening on any of those buildings. this is our backyard, it's our only private space. But according to our codes, we have to suck it up because apparently people can't see further than 6 metres. Mr. Scott Higgins also said that it wasn't his fault that his 70-year-old house had such a setback, but it's not our fault either. It begs the point that if the property didn't suit the privacy needs of a growing family, why purchase such an inconvenient house? With a vacant block next door, there was also a reasonable chance that it was going to be built on. I can't see that it's either fair or reasonable to penalise us for the shortcomings of a neighbouring property to the extent of having us to live in what amounts as a cocoon now that it is screened. It's like the worst possible feeling, and I quite deeply resent it. I also resent the effect that having to do all this when we comply to the R code, and when our building, what we've done is completely legal according to the R code. And it's sort of like the same situation as gambling in a tavern, really. Councillor Steck, I understand that you asked last Tuesday at the Q&A if we would take this to SAT. We most certainly will take it to SAT if it's not passed tonight. We're already there on Tuesday with other building issues, so it won't be new to us. The lack of dialogue with our neighbours shows fault on both sides, but what we're going through, just getting possession of the keys to our home and being absolutely shell-shocked by this development about the screening, it wasn't at forefront of our mind. We were told by our builder that he will dialogue with the neighbours, which he did, but obviously not about this issue because he didn't tell us until February. That and the fact that in previous attempts hasn't been terribly successful. When we engaged TCON, we were under the impression that this was in their remit, and Gary has had meetings with the neighbours on this issue. We did meet on Monday for discussions with Mr Farnsworth and Mr Scott Higgins. We have agreed to keep our window permanently screened, which is the closest to the front of his home. And apparently there are things that will come to light in I don't know whether Mr Scott Higgins is going to talk about that tonight or not. And we have said that we will keep our other windows screened while this is coming to fruition. So 2 months really we're looking at with that.
Mrs Bridgen, can you just summarise now?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
That's it.
Thanks
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Mr Scott Higgins. Welcome to you.
Mr Mayor, councillors. Councillors, I want to reiterate my objection that this is an invasion of privacy. It overlooks our child's playground 3 metres away from their balcony and has direct vision into a minor's bedroom. A number of people have actually been up, and you don't have to be a contortionist. You have to be a normal person to look straight into that bedroom. Minutes from the 10th of July, the agenda support this statement stating that the habitable room window, bifold doors and the balcony facing north does impact the visual privacy of the adjoining property, quote, and that the building has already been constructed and therefore the only available solution to protect the privacy of the adjoining property is by using the use of screening devices. I have approached Council on numerous occasions to discuss our concerns with visual privacy and have been informed verbally and in writing that the property must be built as per the R codes and the building plans, and it must have opaque screening. Council, I've been reassured as far back as late last year that this will be the case. To our surprise, we received in the mail a request to remove any requirement of visual privacy, which, as the landowners, it comes as quite a surprise to us because we've always been told by Council that the screening would be part of that building. Initial mediation brokered by Council on the 16th had the Bridgens as a no-show, meaning they did not attend, nor did they give notification of no attendance. In conclusion, we've done nothing wrong here and we've been open to negotiations. However, negotiations take 2 parties to be fully committed to find an amicable solution. Councillors, By approving this removal of visual privacy means that you are stating to your electorate that you approve a 13th hour submission that blatantly has disregard of process and a total disregard of any moral or ethical rights to privacy. Council, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Fitzgerald. Welcome to you, Gary.
Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors. My name is Gary Fitzgerald, Director of TechOn Australia. I'm here tonight to present on this item for Mr and Mrs Bridgham to speak for the executive recommendation. Councillors, we do have a quick presentation with a couple of visuals, if that's possible. I beg your pardon. Councillors, I'll just start by saying it's been an issue which has caused a fair bit of discussion, some fairly emotional, but what I would like to do tonight is just focus on the planning framework in which this item sits, in which we would ask you to consider it, and which your staff have recommended the resolution tonight. Council, in saying the emotive issues, there is no doubt that Mr and Mrs Bridgham have an appreciation for the comments that are raised, but they're emotive comments that have, in their opinion and in my interpretation from a planning framework perspective, no validity in regards to the issue. If you're obviously aware of the site, this is a photo taken from the adjoining landowner's property. We were there together. It's with authorisation from the adjoining landowner, just as a matter of courtesy, which shows the position directly in front of the house. So it gives you a good perspective of what you can see from front veranda to the front yard, and that the house sitting forward of it. Clearly, there's no doubt about that. Councillors, you've got the appendix in your agenda item. I just make a couple of references. Now, the areas shown in green, starting from the left to the right with the notations with the arrows, basically refer to areas that comply with the R codes in regards to open areas that could be considered. Might not be considered by the applicant as being appropriate, but they comply with the statutory requirements and meet the minimum requirements. You can see the next item, which points to the front building line and the issue about the setbacks being discussed. The dotted line at the front, which shows the setback as per the coding of the development, which would normally be the case, noting on the corner that Mr and Mrs Bridgham's house is set back further than the minimum requirements that could be. And of course, then you've got the area that's referred to as B within the yellow lines, talking about what might be referred to as the area of being overlooked. But it's not, councillors, and what we would say to you is that within that planning framework, as you would be familiar, that the R codes refer to design elements and deemed to comply provisions. We would argue that it meets both of those requirements. A couple of things I'd just like to point out, councillors, I better speed up. If you look at the objectives, I think we have to look at the whole thing. The objectives are, at the bottom of the page, to design buildings, and the key words there are minimise adverse impact on the privacy of private open space. Minimise open space is set aside on a lot for the exclusive use. Council, that's important and that's critical to this whole issue. The exclusive use is not the front of the property, and while I might appreciate the comments raised, that's the crux of the issue. The front of your house, the front of my house is not exclusive use. We can see the setback area. These are defined terms, council, so the council's working within that framework. It's the horizontal distance to the front of the building, and quite clearly in that red area it's shown as a very large setback. Councillors, a quick drive around from my office, and this is not cherry picking, it's to give you examples where you can see the exact same situation occur time and time again. Front veranda, open, an area that requires protection under the R codes, looks into the adjoining owner's property in this one, if you take that particular situation. If you take another situation, you can see the balcony looking directly into that front property, but there's blinds there, councillors. That's what happens in the front of the properties. This is another one on my way home. I saw this and thought, well, I'm not just in one area. Front veranda, windows, open area, looks into the front of that house. Council, this is my house, and the house next door, very good friends of ours, our veranda looks into their front window. We'd never thought of it until recently, but that's the reality of the situation that you'll see commonly around town in many developments where there are houses that are set forward. The exclusive use of the front of that property, or the fact that this is not exclusive use, is the critical element here. The proposal meets the R codes, it meets the design requirements, and it meets the performance requirements. Councillors, in summary, what I would say to you is the key elements that I would like you to take away in considering this matter is, as I said, The intent of the R codes is to minimise impacts, not stop all, because it can't be. It's not, the R codes are not designed to be an interpretation on an absolute prohibition of visual interaction. That's stated out of the R codes, Councillor. You can't achieve that. That's just inappropriate or impossible. It's an accepted principle that the frontage of the property open to the street is not exclusive use. Again, councillors, this is a critical element from a planning framework point of view. And finally, the owners of 37 Picton Crescent, as Rhonda has discussed, have designed their building for views to the northeast. They should not be penalised as a result of an interpretation of an overviewing of an area that's not exclusive use. Councillors, thank you very much for your time. Happy to answer any questions if any councillors had any.
Thank you. Councillors, we have the executive recommendation before us. Is there anyone prepared to move it?
Can I just ask a question of the officers?
Yes, through me, Councillor.
I'm just wondering if, thank you. Yeah, I'm just wondering if we could just have a bit of a verbal update on terms of, we did send this back to try to obviously get a resolution between the parties. It appears that hasn't happened and that's why it's back. But I'm just wondering if we could get a bit of an update from our officers as to, you know,
Those discussions.
yeah, and why that wasn't able to be met.
Yep, thank you. CEO.
Mr Mayor, I'll defer to the planning, Manager of Planning.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually sat and convened that mediation session, if you like, informally. That meeting was conducted on a without prejudice basis, which means that the ground rules for having that meeting was that both parties were assured that we would only share what they felt comfortable to make public. I would like to congratulate both parties, considering, as you see, the degree of stress that's involved in this, and I really do congratulate both parties for coming along and sitting down with me. I felt that we actually achieved quite a lot, and you've already heard the suggestion of keeping one of the windows screened, and we are assisting Mr Scott Higgins with an appropriate solution that he's exploring on his side that I think should take care of most of the problems. But in the end of the day, the applicant is seeking to get an approval within the scope of what is lawful. So as Mr Fitzgerald has quite well explained, I can't completely solve out all the problems, but we are doing our very level best to accommodate both parties, and that would be as far as I'd feel comfortable speaking so as not to breach their confidence.
Thank you. Someone prepared to move? Councillor Steck, is there a seconder?
Oh, sorry, sir.
Councillor Cook, Councillor Steck.
Thank you, sir. Given the provisions that we set this aside for an extra 2 weeks, sir, I think that given the circumstances that quite clearly we can only really approve this application in consideration that there are other, I guess, opportunities for the neighbours to look at screenings if they are uncomfortable in their own yards, but the last thing we want is to have people feeling like that they are imprisoned in their own house, sir. And it's always, as an ex-real estate agent, I can tell you that when you do habit a property, you do make it comfortable for yourself and you do put screens where you think that you ought to. So I'm considering that it conforms to the town planning scheme, the design codes, and in fact we are still working with the two groups. I think that the building itself is quite impressive, and I think council should vote for the motion.
Councillor Cook. No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Is there a speaker against? I'll put it all in favour. Those against? 2 against, that's carried. Councillors, we move to item 11. We've received a request from Councillor Steck for leave of absence during the period 29th of July to the 15th of August. I'm prepared to move that. Thank you, Councillor Cook. Seconder. Councillor Hayward, all in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, can someone prepared to move we go behind closed doors on 15.1? Councillor McCleary, seconder. Councillor Cook, all in favour? That's carried. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're now dealing with a confidential